Clint Eastwood has spent decades around some of the biggest names in Hollywood, but there is one thing many of them eventually discovered. Clint doesn't always give people the response they expect. He doesn't need a long speech, a big reaction, or a carefully prepared answer. Sometimes, a few simple words are enough. Actors who worked with him have talked about his unusual way of directing. Comedians have tested his sense of humor. Famous co-stars have learned that when Clint says a scene is finished, he usually means it. And during interviews, even experienced celebrities have occasionally found themselves dealing with a man who simply doesn't play along with the usual Hollywood routine. What makes these moments interesting is that Clint rarely appears to be trying to prove anything. His approach is usually straightforward. Say what he thinks, do the work, and move on. Over the years, that attitude has produced some genuinely memorable encounters. Some celebrities were surprised by his blunt answers. Others discovered his dry sense of humor. And a few learned that getting Clint Eastwood to change his mind is not always easy. So, what happens when Hollywood celebrities meet Clint Eastwood with absolutely no filter? These are some of the moments that explain why even people who have worked with him for years still have a story to tell. Clint Eastwood is one of the most recognizable figures in Hollywood, with a career that has lasted for decades as both an actor and director. But his reputation was never built only on the characters he played. People who have worked with him often describe a very specific personality: calm, direct, disciplined, and not particularly interested in wasting words. That approach can be very different from what celebrities experience in Hollywood. Interviews are often carefully planned, actors are used to multiple takes, and directors may spend a great deal of time explaining what they want. Clint has often taken the opposite approach. He prefers to keep things simple, trust the people around him, and move forward when he believes something is good enough. His co-stars have shared stories about moments when they expected another take, another explanation, or another opportunity to change his mind. Instead, they got a short answer and a clear decision. Other celebrities have discovered that his quiet personality doesn't mean he lacks a sense of humor. In fact, his dry delivery has produced some of the most memorable interactions involving him. What also stands out is that Clint has generally avoided trying to create a perfect public image. He has spoken openly about not worrying too much about what everyone thinks of him. For someone who has spent so much time in the public eye, that attitude is unusual. And that's exactly what makes his celebrity encounters worth looking at. Behind the famous roles and directing credits is a man whose simple, direct approach has caught plenty of famous people off guard. One of the first things celebrities notice when working with Clint Eastwood is how little time he wants to waste on a scene. Actors are often used to doing several takes, sometimes trying different versions of the same performance. Clint has a different approach. If he believes the scene works, he doesn't see much reason to keep repeating it. Several actors have described his directing style as remarkably simple. He doesn't spend long giving instructions or turning every moment into a major discussion. He lets the actors do their work, watches carefully, and then decides whether they have what they need. That can be surprising, especially for actors who arrive on set with several ideas about how they want to approach a scene. They may expect the director to ask for another version, change something, or give them more direction. With Clint, the answer can be much shorter. In one memorable account, an actor finished a take and was prepared to continue working through different possibilities. Instead, Clint simply decided they had what they needed and moved on. The interesting part wasn't that Clint was trying to intimidate anyone. His method was based on efficiency. He trusted experienced actors to prepare, and he didn't believe a performance automatically became better just because it was repeated several more times. That philosophy became one of the things people remembered most about working with him. When Clint Eastwood says the take is good, there may be no reason to ask for another one. Matt Damon learned just how seriously Clint Eastwood takes his one-take approach when they worked together. Damon arrived on set excited to work with Eastwood, whom he considered one of his heroes. Like many experienced actors, he had already thought about different ways he could approach the scene. He knew the material, had prepared carefully, and expected there might be an opportunity to try several versions. Then they did the first take. According to Damon, he finished the scene and was ready to hear what Eastwood wanted to change. Instead, Clint simply called it finished and moved on. Damon was surprised. He apparently wanted to ask whether they could do another take, but Eastwood's response made his philosophy very clear. Why repeat something that already worked? The moment became memorable because Damon had years of experience and had done scenes many times before. Yet even he wasn't expecting such a quick decision from the director. Eastwood's approach was not about making the actor uncomfortable. It reflected the way he preferred to work. He prepared his actors, trusted them to do their jobs, and avoided spending unnecessary time repeating a performance. For Damon, the lesson was simple. Sometimes an actor can spend so much time thinking about different possibilities that they forget the first performance may already be enough. Working with Clint meant being ready for that possibility. You might arrive with several ideas in your head, give him your performance, and expect another opportunity. Clint might simply decide that the job is done and move on. Being Clint Eastwood's son might sound like an automatic advantage in Hollywood, but Scott Eastwood learned that his father didn't see it that way. Scott has spoken about auditioning for his father's movies, even though Clint already knew him personally and had seen him work. You might expect a famous director to simply give his son a role, especially when the opportunity is available. Clint apparently preferred a different approach. Scott explained that he had auditioned for several of his father's films and didn't get many of the parts. That alone says a lot about how Clint separated his work as a director from his relationship as a father. Eventually, Scott was cast in Gran Torino. His role was relatively small, and the character was supposed to receive a hard time from Clint's character. During filming, however, Scott recalled that some of the material between them went beyond what had originally been written. When asked about it, Scott suggested that some of the exchange may have reflected years of frustration between father and son. In other words, Clint wasn't simply treating him like the director's son. He was treating him like another actor in the story. That approach may seem strict, but it also explains something important about Clint's working style. He doesn't appear to believe that family connections should automatically determine professional decisions. For Scott, getting a role in one of Clint's movies still meant proving himself. Being Clint Eastwood's son could get him into the room, but it didn't guarantee that he would get the part. Clint Eastwood's reputation for being serious can sometimes make people forget that he has a very dry sense of humor. The interesting part is that he rarely needs a big reaction to make a joke work. His humor often comes through in the way he delivers a simple answer. He can say something completely unexpected in the same calm tone he uses when discussing his work, which can leave the person sitting across from him wondering whether Clint is being serious. That style has made several celebrity interactions memorable. While other Hollywood personalities may respond to jokes with a laugh, a long explanation, or an equally dramatic comeback, Clint often keeps his response short. His longtime screen image also adds to the effect. After decades of playing characters known for being tough and controlled, people naturally expect him to behave in a similar way off camera. When that seriousness is combined with a dry joke, the contrast becomes part of the humor. What makes Clint's style different is that he doesn't seem to need everyone in the room to know that he is joking. He can deliver a line, pause, and simply move on. That was also part of what made working with him distinctive. Celebrities couldn't always predict whether Clint would respond with a serious answer, a short joke, or nothing at all. His humor wasn't necessarily loud or attention-seeking. It was usually understated, direct, and delivered without much explanation. And sometimes, that made the joke even more effective. Clint could say something simple, keep a completely straight face, and leave everyone else to figure out what he meant. One reason Clint Eastwood's reputation carries so much weight is that it isn't based only on stories told by fans. Some of the people who have worked with him are major Hollywood figures themselves, and many of them have their own memories of Clint. Actors have described him as remarkably calm on set. Instead of giving long speeches about every detail, Clint often keeps his instructions short and lets people work. For experienced performers, that can be refreshing. They know what they are supposed to do, and he gives them room to do it. Others have focused on his discipline. Clint built a career that moved between acting and directing, and his colleagues have often noticed how prepared and efficient he is. He doesn't appear interested in making the filmmaking process more complicated than necessary. Then there are the stories about his personality. Some celebrities remember him as intimidating at first, largely because of his quiet manner and reputation. But after spending time with him, they often discover a more relaxed and humorous side. That's one of the interesting things about Clint. Different people seem to describe different sides of the same person. One actor remembers his professionalism. Another remembers his humor. Someone else remembers how little he said. But there is one common thread. Clint usually doesn't behave like someone who needs to prove that he's the most important person in the room. After decades in Hollywood, he has worked with actors, directors, comedians, and some of the biggest names in entertainment. And many of them eventually walk away with the same thing. A story about what it was like to spend time with Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood has spent most of his life in the public eye, but but he has never seemed particularly interested in making everyone like him. When asked whether he worries about what people think of him, his answer was straightforward. He explained that people are going to form their own opinions, whether those opinions are positive, negative, or somewhere in between. His job, as he sees it, is to do his work rather than constantly manage how other people see him. That attitude is unusual in an industry where public image can become almost as important as the work itself. Actors and celebrities often have to deal with interviews, publicity, criticism, and expectations from audiences. It can be tempting to carefully choose every answer in order to maintain a certain image. Clint's approach has generally been much simpler. He doesn't seem interested in creating a personality just because he thinks people will respond well to it. Instead, he has repeatedly emphasized doing the work and allowing people to make their own judgments. That also helps explain why his interviews can feel different from the usual celebrity conversation. He isn't always trying to give the perfect answer or turn every question into a promotional opportunity. For Clint, public opinion is something he can't completely control, so there is little point in spending his life trying to control it. Whether people admire him, disagree with him, or simply find him difficult to understand, his philosophy remains consistent. Do the work, be yourself, and let everyone else decide what they think. That may be one of the clearest explanations for why Clint Eastwood has remained so direct throughout his career. One of the most interesting things about Clint Eastwood is that he understands the value of silence. During an interview, Clint was asked about his use of silence in films and why people often describe his performances as expressive even when he isn't saying much. His answer focused on something surprisingly simple: listening. Clint explained that listening is one of the most important parts of acting. Anyone can deliver a lot of dialogue, but actually listening to the person speaking requires attention. He went even further, saying that listening is important beyond acting and should be part of everyday life. That idea says a lot about the way Clint approaches performance. Instead of trying to fill every moment with words, he allows pauses and reactions to communicate something. It also helps explain why his screen presence can feel so controlled. A character doesn't always need a long speech to make an impression. Sometimes the way someone listens, reacts, or simply waits can tell the audience more than another line of dialogue. The same quality can be noticed in interviews with Clint. He doesn't appear uncomfortable with pauses, and he rarely seems desperate to fill silence just because the camera is running. For other celebrities, that can create an unusual dynamic. They are used to conversations where someone immediately responds, but Clint can take his time and listen before answering. His point was simple: hearing someone speak isn't necessarily the same as truly listening to them. For Clint Eastwood, that distinction became an important part of both his acting philosophy and the way he approached life. Clint Eastwood has worked with plenty of comedians over the years, but few were as comfortable teasing him as Don Rickles. When the two appeared together, Rickles did what he was known for. He went straight after Clint with jokes and insults, without worrying too much about whether the other person was a Hollywood legend. Rickles reminded Clint that they had worked together years earlier on Kelly's Heroes, then joked that he hadn't heard from him since. He continued with the kind of personal humor that made his performances famous, even suggesting that Clint wasn't much of an actor. The interesting part wasn't simply what Rickles said. It was Clint's reaction. Clint had a reputation for being difficult to embarrass, and he didn't need to compete with Rickles by trying to become the louder person in the conversation. He could simply sit there and let the comedian do what he did best. Rickles even joked about Clint's personality and his famously quiet lifestyle. The humor worked because both men understood the situation. Rickles was there to push the jokes as far as he could, while Clint was comfortable enough not to take every comment seriously. Their interaction showed another side of Clint that isn't always obvious from his serious screen roles. He could take a joke, sit through a roast, and allow another celebrity to have the spotlight without turning the moment into a serious confrontation. That's part of what made their exchanges memorable. Don Rickles could talk almost non-stop, but Clint didn't need to match him. Sometimes, his willingness to simply sit back and take the jokes said more than any comeback could have. Not every story about Clint Eastwood is about acting, directing, or Hollywood. One of the lesser-known chapters of his life happened long before he became one of the industry's biggest names. In 1951, while serving in the U.S. Army, Eastwood was a passenger aboard a military aircraft that developed problems and made a crash landing in the Pacific Ocean near Northern California. Eastwood and another serviceman survived and had to make their way through the water toward shore. The incident became one of those unusual experiences that could easily have remained unknown to the public. Eastwood was still a young man at the time, years away from becoming the actor and director audiences would eventually recognize around the world. What makes the story interesting is how different it is from the image most people associate with him. Before the famous westerns, the major movies, and the directing career, Eastwood had already experienced something that could have changed the course of his life. He has generally not built his public identity around stories like this. That's part of why details from his early life can be surprising when they come up in interviews or conversations. By the time he became a Hollywood star, Eastwood had already lived through experiences far removed from movie sets and celebrity interviews. And that background adds another layer to understanding him. The calm, controlled personality people later noticed on film sets wasn't the beginning of his story. Clint Eastwood had already experienced a very different life before Hollywood made him famous. After decades in Hollywood, Clint Eastwood has had countless opportunities to become more concerned with appearances. Instead, one of the clearest things about his personality is how rarely he seems interested in pretending to be someone he isn't. That attitude becomes especially noticeable when he is around other celebrities. Clint doesn't usually try to dominate a conversation, and he doesn't appear interested in carefully constructing every response. If he has something to say, he tends to say it simply. If he doesn't, he is perfectly comfortable saying very little. That's what makes his interactions so different. A celebrity may arrive expecting the usual Hollywood routine: polite answers, carefully chosen words, and a little publicity. Clint's approach can be much more direct. His career also reflects that independence. As an actor, he developed a recognizable style without constantly trying to change himself to fit every trend. As a director, he became known for giving performers room to work and keeping productions efficient. And as a public figure, he has repeatedly shown that he is willing to let people form their own opinions. That combination explains why some celebrities have found him difficult to predict. They can't always tell whether they'll get a serious answer, a dry joke, or a simple response that ends the conversation. But perhaps that's the real meaning behind the zero-filter reputation. Clint isn't necessarily trying to shock anyone. He simply doesn't seem interested in adding unnecessary words or creating an image for other people. After all these years, his approach remains remarkably consistent. Do the work, say what you mean, and don't spend too much time worrying about how everyone else reacts. And for a Hollywood career that has lasted this long, that straightforward attitude may be one of the reasons Clint Eastwood remains so memorable. Clint Eastwood's most memorable celebrity moments aren't necessarily memorable because he says something shocking. They are memorable because of how consistently he approaches people and his work. Whether he's directing an experienced actor, listening to another celebrity, responding to a comedian, or talking about his own career, Clint usually keeps things simple. He doesn't seem interested in wasting time, explaining himself unnecessarily, or changing his personality just to make everyone comfortable. That's why so many people who have worked with him have a story to tell. Some remember his one-take approach. Others remember his dry humor, his quiet manner, or the way he could make a simple answer feel like the end of the conversation. And perhaps the most interesting part is that Clint's zero-filter reputation doesn't come from constantly trying to shock people. It comes from being remarkably consistent. He says what he thinks, listens when he needs to, makes his decisions, and moves on. After decades in Hollywood, that straightforward attitude has become part of what makes Clint Eastwood so recognizable. You can agree with him or disagree with him, but one thing is difficult to deny. Clint Eastwood has never needed a lot of words to make people pay attention. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe for more memorable moments and unexpected stories from Hollywood legends.